Let's go to the Middle East. There have been more strikes overnight. In Lebanon, I'll show you the skyline in Beirut this morning. Strikes were reported in Bada, which is a southern suburb of Beirut. This comes as America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, is continuing his visit in the region. He was in Israel on Tuesday. He's just left Israel. He'll now be visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE. In Israel, he urged the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to capitalise on the recent killing of Hamas's leader by securing the release of all hostages and ending the conflict in Gaza.
Since October 7th, a year ago, Israel has achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed much of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. This has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really two things left to do. Get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow. Finally, even as we're dealing with Gaza, with the hostages, with the humanitarian situation, it's also been an imperative for us to try to make sure that this conflict doesn't spread. We are resolute in our defense of Israel when it comes to attacks it's receiving from Iran, from Iran's proxies. And we stand with Israel and will always stand with Israel in its defense. It's also very important that Israel respond in ways that do not create greater escalation.
That's Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, just half an hour ago before he took off from Israel, heading for Saudi Arabia. Let's talk to our correspondent Yolande now, who's in Jerusalem. Yolande, parting thoughts there from Antony Blinken after his 11th visit to Israel. Any sense of progress?
Not really. I mean, on that subject, that was really his message here, that both Gaza and Lebanon, Israel has now achieved these significant military wins. It's time to turn those into diplomatic achievements. And he talked both about reinvigorating efforts for a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza. And also, when it comes to Lebanon, he said a peaceful diplomatic resolution was possible. That this should be based on the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which ended the last war between Israel and Hezbollah back in 2006. This, he said, has never been implemented. Then there was a strong message when it came to humanitarian aid into Gaza. That has really been something that we've heard a lot about this month, with the UN showing data that really indicates that aid going in has plummeted to its lowest level all year. And we had earlier this month the letter that was sent by Mr. Blinken and the US Defense Secretary, which became public, writing to Israeli ministers, really reminding them of their obligations under US law when it comes to weapons transfer funding, and saying that they needed to see improvements immediately and ongoing over the next 30 days if there weren't to be some kind of repercussion. Now, Mr. Blinken said on the tarmac there just before he left for Riyadh that they were demanding concrete, specific actions to all of this.
Yolande, looking at what else is emerging from the day he spent yesterday and what he's been saying there on the runway, how much focus has there been on the future of Gaza, that idea that Israel may seek to reoccupy Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, it was pointed out to him by a journalist who was asking a question that just as he had been speaking to Mr. Netanyahu, there had been this conference that was taking place involving several Israeli ministers on the border with Gaza, talking about how they want to resettle the north of Gaza in particular. That's where, of course, Israel has this ongoing military offensive, which it says officially is to root out Hamas elements. There's also been a lot of speculation about whether Israel could be implementing this so-called general's plan drawn up by retired Israeli generals, talking about turning the north of Gaza into a closed military zone and really giving people living there the choice to either to leave leave, i.e. forced displacement or starvation. And Mr. Blinken strongly denied that was Israeli policy from the point of view of what he has been told. He said that the US position was to reject any Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. And, you know, that is going to be an ongoing issue, I think, during this trip as he meets other Arab leaders. The point as he goes to Riyadh and to meet other Arab leaders in different countries, he has said, is to talk also about, you know, post-war vision for Gaza. But it is difficult to do that with no real end in sight to the fighting that's going on the ground.
Yolan, thank you very much. Yolan in Jerusalem. Let's just show you the skyline of the Lebanese capital, Beirut, as Israel continues to bombard certain parts of Lebanon, hitting, it claims, Hezbollah targets, many in the south of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Our correspondent, Jonathan Head, has the latest on what's been going on.
It's been 3 nights now of successive nights of multiple airstrikes in Beirut. The usual pattern, warnings given beforehand. They don't always give warnings, identifying specific buildings they're going to target, and then the airstrikes came almost within, well, with less than an hour. They were 6 before midnight. Very, very noisy, very powerful explosions, very difficult for people living anywhere near there to sleep. This warning to the southern city of Tyre is it's been hit before. This is quite close to the area. Down in the south, there's a lot of combat going on close to the border. Tyre hasn't been hit as much as some other smaller towns which Israel seems to believe have Hezbollah targets. And these warnings are for an area right in the city centre of Tyre. It's a very ancient city where there is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we'll have to see what happens later today. But I mean, for Lebanon, it's a similar pattern to previous days. Every day there are airstrikes. There are many, many parts of the country, and nobody can really relax.
What is known about the latest Hezbollah senior figure that Israel says it has killed?
He was the head of their central committee, a very senior figure inside the organization, and he was presumed to be the successor to Hassan Nasrallah, who of course was killed on the 27th of September. Now it's thought the Israeli Prime Minister actually announced he'd been killed nearly 2 weeks ago in an airstrike in Beirut. But that was not confirmed at the time, and local civil defense force people here say they've been unable to retrieve the bodies from that airstrike because of threats of further bombings by the Israeli defense forces. They warned them not to go near there. It seems they've now been able to confirm that he was killed. And it leaves us with the only known figure left in the leadership of Hezbollah who's at all public, is Naim Qassem. He's very much more of a political figure. He's the one who's made statements since the death of Nasrallah. But we don't think he's even here in Lebanon. There's a belief that he probably fled to Iran earlier this month when the Iranian foreign minister was here, and has been giving his statements probably from there. And Hezbollah has not announced that he's the next leader, if he's indeed to be that, perhaps because they don't want him to be a target either. Remember, Israel's been able to assassinate people in Iran as well. So at this stage, Hezbollah is an organization where its leadership structure is not known, and its capacity to keep fighting Israel is also not known, although it's argued that its command and control has not been disrupted, and the fact that it can still send, you know, a couple of hundred rockets every day over the border to Israel, despite the incredible fighting going on down in the south, suggests that it is still quite capable.
Jonathan, while you speak, we see the smoke continuing to rise over parts of Beirut. What is the continuing effect on the civilians? Where are people going?
Well, they're moving to other neighborhoods, but that's difficult because, you know, this is causing all sorts of problems now in Lebanon. You know, people may remember we were reporting a strike on a Christian village about 10 days ago in Aitu, where 24 people were killed. That village has had a lot of people have left, partly because of the conflicts and in previous wars, and people from the south, from the Shia south, had moved up there to find homes, and they were then struck by an Israeli strike, killed lots of women and children there. We think they were all among the IDPs, but all over Beirut there are now people who've moved into other neighborhoods, and that's causing a lot of problems. Remember, Lebanon has a very complex sort of sectarian makeup. And there are lots of different communities in Beirut who traditionally stuck to certain areas. So when you get an awful lot of Shia moving into an area that's not had them before, that creates strains, it creates fears that the civil wars we've had in the past could reignite. And of course, they worry that these Shia coming in may be bringing people in who the Israelis want to target, and then that makes them a target. So, and then there's just the enormous pressure in a country where the government's so weak in just feeding people and providing enough, water or social health services. All of that's proving very, very complicated for this country to handle.
Jonathan Head in Beirut.